Hello, everyone, and welcome. And we will begin our program in just a moment. Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen Stovall, and I'm the Director of Programs for MCAD Miami, and would like to welcome you to today's program. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce Sarah Hernandez, who is the Chairman of our board for MCAD Miami. Sarah, if you could turn on your camera. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the MCAD's Urban Redesign, and we're proud to be hosting this with the American Planning Association, the Gold Coast section. And today's program is about urbanism. We've got Choice or Fate and Joe Miniscosi from Urban 3 will be helping us with this. And you've got a lot of interesting people that are going to be on this panel, and I'll let Cheryl make those introductions. Couple of things I want to talk to you guys about, which is that MCAD is taking care of. We're doing book talks, finding ways to connect and to keep everybody on what's going on with urban design. So on August 27th at 7 p.m., we've got a book talk with Rocco Chio and Joanna Lombard, and that should be very interesting. Please join us, and this programming is free through MCAD. And then on September 10th at 6 p.m., we've got Kobe Karp, and that should be also interesting on his new book. Please join us. Then every Wednesday, MCAD puts out the survival guide. I hope you guys have time to read that. And if there's anything that you think we should be including on that, please let us know. We're happy to share new haunts, things that people are doing to stay entertained during this time. Also, we've got space situations exhibit on 3D on our website. Please check that out. And then we've got our Urban Warrior Award preview on September 17th. And every year we give out awards for those that are making a difference in the urban design. Please join us. And also we're taking nominations for anybody that you think we should be honoring for our Urban Warrior. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Jacobs, our Executive Director of MCAD. Cheryl?
Hey, Sarah, thanks. I just want to say, I hate to correct my president, but I'm going to have to. The Urbanism with Joe Miniscosi, that's the 28th. That's next week. Sorry about that, Sarah. I didn't put the date on there. Today's chat is about mobility. And also on our Urban Warrior, we had to cancel this year. So we're doing a preview of next year, which will be May 20th. And this year, September 17th is our preview. And we're going to have a fantastic panel of previous winners. So you may have already seen the announcement. Tickets are getting ready to go on sale. So keep an eye out for that. I wanted to see, I'm looking on the list of people to see if Juan Mullarat is on from APA, but I don't see him, but Cesar Garcia Pons is. And Cesar, if you want to come in and say a couple of words about APA.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Cheryl.
Sure.
So we've really been enjoying this collaboration with MCAD over the past several weeks and probably a couple of months. I think this is maybe our third or fourth one, Cheryl, that we've done for the urban redesign. Cheryl, of course, is a star of all of them, and the rest of us panelists are just there to help her, move the conversation along. I am like super excited about today's effort with Victor and Marta and Carlos. We agreed to participate immediately when, Cheryl and I talked about this thing, because we would love to expand our outreach from our planners world into the architecture world and the MCAD world. And I believe that these 3 or 4 that we've done have been so successful and so great that we have done so. So if anybody's interested in the American Planning Association or the Florida American Association or the Gold Coast section of the Florida APA, feel free to reach out to me or Juan Muirat, as Cheryl mentioned, and or Camila Zabla, which is also on the phone on the call. So we look forward to a spirited conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Cesar. So with that, let me bring our panelists on board. If you guys would unmute and bring your video back on. First is Victor Dober. Hi, Victor. Victor is a fellow at AICP designation, which means he's a heavy hitter, right? And a CNU fellow as well with Dover Kohn Partners Town Planning. Next, Marta Viciedo, founding partner of the Urban Impact Lab, and she's also a founder of the Miami Transit Alliance. And then last but definitely not least, Carlos Cruz-Casas, Assistant Director of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, because you didn't have enough to do with just transportation, Carlos, for Miami-Dade County. So welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. So this is a conversation that we could probably, go on for hours and hours on. So I'm going to work really hard to keep us within our 1 hour time allotment. But I want to start with something because not all of you not everybody knows everybody. And I'm going to start with you, Marta. What would you like our participants to know about you?
What a great question. I think a lot of people think that I am a transportation, let's put it mildly, nut. Some people think I'm just kind of like crazy, and I am. But I think the thing I want people to know, it's not just because I think trains are cool or because I like buses. It's because transportation is actually a much bigger picture item to me, and transportation really means like a really healthy, a very vibrant, a very resilient city. And so it's that thing. It's not just because I'm a transportation nut. It's because I really love like cities that work really well for so many people. And so I want to offer that up.
That's great. That's great. How about you, Carlos?
Well, let me follow that thread, right? So I guess I chose also to be a transportation nut, right? So one thing, early in the career, I had the opportunity to either follow a regular engineering kind of school or go into transportation. And basically the similar reason that Marta said, that's why I kind of jumped into transportation. So early on from my early graduate education, everything has been transportation. And the one thing I can tell you, it is fascinating for a transportation official or a professional to be living in these times. And we've seen over the last decade and a half, transformative changes in transportation. And one thing that we know is there's room for change. And I'm excited about that. So it's been, I've done everything from bicycle pedestrian, traffic, transportation planning, transit, and we've seen that everything kind of melts together now. And that's what I'm excited about, what's ahead of us.
That's great. Thanks, Carlos. Victor?
Well, I always introduce myself as a town planner, urban designer, and sometimes people say, well, what is that? And I say, well, it's like a form of troublemaker or question asker. that you don't hire because you want to keep things exactly as they are. You get brought into a situation, usually a troubled, challenging situation, because people need help managing change. They want to fix something, fix design or fix policy or fix regulation, something like that. So that takes us to a lot of different kinds of scales and work. And but really what we often find ourselves doing is explaining with pictures or drawings or words the difference between what is now and what is meant to be, or what would be better, what the options are. So in the end, it's like all about visualizing change before it occurs. So that's one way I look at what we do. Doesn't matter whether we're working on a trail or working on a bike plan or redesigning a street or neighborhood or a regional plan. They're really the same thing. It's all about visualizing change.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that the three of you all want to get to the same conclusion, but you maybe go about it from different directions. So that's what's so interesting, I think, about how you all approach this. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because this is a more recent way, this word mobility is like an all-encompassing word. And if you look it up, the first thing on mobility that you see is talking about promotions at work. So I want to know, Marta, how do you define mobility?
No, I think for me, it's really simple. It's just the ability to get from where you are to where you want to be. And I think that applies on the very personal level, getting to school, getting to work, getting to a service or, an entertainment thing that you need or want. But it also applies to a city, right? Getting from where it is as a system, as a city, as the community to where it wants to be. And so I think that there's a lot of economic mobility embedded into what we see as our transportation systems. And so I think that applies in almost every level.
I agree with that. Carlos?
I always looked at it as freedom, as an opportunity to achieve and basically do what we want to do with our lives. Like Marta said, either to go to school, to go to work, to go to see a friend, to go just be outside and look at the stars, right? So to me, it's the ability that allow us to do all those things, and we are to support that and to make sure that we can help grow our community in a place that is safe, and we encourage good practice of mobility, because it includes 4 wheels, 2 wheels, into your own 2 feet, and we can have good practice of mobility, and we can have also mobility that impedes growth for one city. So I think there is definitely a cohesion there.
Great. Victor?
Well, I agree with what both of them said. I define it as being able to go where I want to go when I want to go there. So that means wanting a bigger menu of ways to do that, from lightweight and quick and cheap ways of doing it, like walking or biking or using a scooter or something, to bigger and grander ways of doing it for longer distances, like using the bus rapid transit or using a train. One of the ideas in new urbanism is that the metropolitan unit is the basic economic modern unit. So you want to be able sometimes to get across town, and when the need arises, and you also just want to be able to get down your street. And for me, that means, for example, you can't just plan a transit station or a transit line. You also need a tree-lined street with sidewalks leading to it, or you need safe and comfortable bike infrastructure leading to it. And I think there's been some little breakthroughs, like when the county, after a long time of being beat on about this question, started welcoming bikes on metro rail trains a few years ago. So I'd last, success in mobility isn't going to be just about the transportation hardware. It's going to be about all the other stuff. How you design the city.
That's true. So now that we've got that settled, so we've been through this shared experience, right, over the last, few months, several months, in this crazy space. How has it affected your outlook, how you design things, what you're planning, and outreach? I think that's been very difficult. And I'm going to start with you, Marta, because that's a big part of what you do, is outreach to the community and public awareness. And so how has this shared experience affected you and how you do your work?
I think that the effects have been pretty large. I mean, I'm very lucky to work with a group of individuals, both on the Urban Impact Lab end, but also on the Transit Alliance end. Transit Alliance has become far more independent over the last few months. But we work with a really great group of people, individuals that are nimble, that, just kind of see a challenge and they attack it head on. But for us, it's really been, like many people, we've had to move to an almost virtual space to do any large scale engagement, and that has significant challenges. I could rattle them off, but I think a lot of people have experienced them, everything from just pure technical challenges to people that can't get on or don't have, the ability to jump on at whatever time we're doing things. But I've also found, I think, in large part, people are really interested in having, as long as there could be like a safe interaction, people are craving that one-on-one connection. So they'll take the opportunity to meet if it's a very small, maybe it's like one-on-one and we can socially distance, but we can go to a park or an open space. That I think has been kind of something that surprised me, because I figured a lot of people didn't want to take the chance, but I think also a lot of people don't want to take the chance of being disconnected. So that's some of the ways that things have changed for us. I definitely, like many of us, we're not doing as many meetings. We're doing a lot more virtually, which is good and bad. But that's generally the way that we've been having to shift. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the fun gatherings that we used to do. A lot of like very fun or very active, very social events. And those have fallen largely by the wayside. And for a while, I think for a bit longer, they're going to continue that way. I'm concerned about the communities that we've talked to and really have gone out to the street to quite literally play with families, play with children, play in public spaces. And we haven't had the opportunity to do that. And I think that there's a lot of people that feel that need to get back out there and play. And, so I think that's going to be a growing and growing need as the weeks and months wear on, try to figure out how we can do that better.
That's really true.
Yeah.
Also, let me say that we are going to do a Q&A at the end, and if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll get to them a little bit later on. So, Carlos.
Yeah, so let me start with the engagement, right? So I was telling someone the other day that before the situation that we had, I only felt comfortable doing FaceTime with my nieces in Charlotte, right? So and all of a sudden things changed. All of a sudden there's again, yet we are physically separated, but still there's a lot of appetite from the community and from everyone around to continue to have some sort of kind of interaction, even will be through the screen. We're still reaching out further. So in a way, we're still growing the way that we get input, right? I don't know if you guys have followed, the commission meetings or the public meetings. We're getting a lot more people to show and comment, right? So it's a different benefit than the others, and we need to deal with the digital gap. But still, so again, I'm optimistic about a post-COVID situation where we have a lot more interaction in a very diverse component that can allow for us to reach further, right? So that's one thing. And then you talked about, my experience and my outlook on transportation. I mentioned, some of the experience that I have. This is turning everything upside down. Everything that we knew about commuting patterns, everything that we knew how to design, particularly long-range plans that we always talk about, that peak period, 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon, all that is the window now, right? So now we start thinking differently, right? So we were talking always about what we call work-based trips that end or begin at a work location. And now that can be your home, and now you start promoting other trips during the day. So now I'm thinking, do we then start developing a system that is more it's more consistent through the entire day. Like they're working with the Transit Alliance now on the Better Bus Project, we're talking about, should we start eliminating kind of peaking service and making sure that midday service have a more consistent headway. That gives you freedom of relying on transportation, not on the operational characteristics of it, but that you don't have to plan your day about whether or not a bus will be in 40 minutes or 60 minutes, right? More consistency through it. At the same time, we all seen parking lots in the malls empty throughout the year, but full in Christmas Day, right? Or when people are buying near, the Black Friday. If you see our roads, typically it's the same. We design for peak period, heavy directional travel patterns. Then in the middle of the day and in the off-peak direction, you might see some empty conditions. So is this an opportunity for us to say we might not need to continue to go that road to plan for the worst case scenario on a heavy directional pattern in one direction in the morning or in the afternoon, and then balance things out and start creating more space? That's some of the things I'm very enthusiastic in, and at least in where I live in my neighborhood, it opened the door to more people being at home longer, and at the same time not spending time on commuting. And I see the street just filled with parents and their kids walking and biking around. So I'm optimistic that it's going to bring a little bit of a change in the take on life, and what is the balance that we need to bring in order to make sure that we raise the families and kids in the community that we want to have here.
I think it's a great time or an opportunity to take advantage. But we also know that it's not always going to be like this. And we have to how are we going to decide, or guess, what the changes are going to be. Victor, what do you think?
Well, I experienced a lot of the same things that Marta and Carlos have described. We had to switch really quickly to doing things that we traditionally did in person and very interactive and personal public meetings and gatherings into doing them virtually. And with about a week to go in March, we had to switch a charrette in Montana that we planned to do in person to a fully virtual experience. It was, and that was quite a scramble. But a couple things have been revealed from that. We've done that a few times since. One is, it's not all disadvantages. I mean, there are some specific advantages. I had a young woman speak to me in one of the Zoom breakout rooms during a interactive meeting where we were pinning things on maps and what have you. And she's basically described that she was really grateful for the format, that she could participate from home from the safety of her couch. She's a mother, a single mother, and she mentioned that she feels excluded from the traditional public meetings at City Hall, in the early evening, or from those meetings that are held in the school cafeteria to decide what the plan for the neighborhood or the corridor that is going to be, because she can never do that. That always happens on a school night. And then she said, this format, I could get my kids started on their homework or get them started doing something, then come sit down, participate for a while, maybe step away, watch the rest of the event through the recording later at night. And she felt like all of a sudden she was included. And that was very interesting because there was a lot of hand-wringing about who might get excluded inadvertently due to the digital divide. And so these are good questions. We'll make sure that we're not missing out and making things worse for traditionally underrepresented communities. But from that experience, from that conversation, I realized we're actually reaching some people we wouldn't typically reach, including hundreds of people who watch the recordings or use the websites. The last thing about that is just there's something really refreshing about moving your process for public engagement, at least partially online, because then you go from having a meeting to having a relationship. Stuff gets posted. People can look at it in the middle of the night. They can respond to a survey. They interact with the project in some way that when it was just have a meeting, it was a sense that if you missed it, you missed it. The meeting occurred already. But now you could get in on it. And it might not be just that one occasion of interaction, but a whole series of interactions, smaller and larger, shallower and in depth, depending on the need. So that's just one thing about engagement I think is noticeable. I mean, in the world we're planning for, I think there's a couple profound things that happened. A huge number of people in the last few months got a taste for things they might have forgotten about. Living streets, for example, being in their streets without being in their car, wrapping their car around them. Years ago, Alice Bravo started talking about wanting to make Miami-Dade a car optional city. And, that's kind of like the clothing optional beach where you don't have to wear it if you don't want to. Well, if you don't want to wear all that fiberglass and wear all that steel and petroleum and rubber tires and whatever around you to go out into your street. In the last few months, a lot of people had got a taste for that again, and I think they found they liked it. So we see around my street right outside here, I see people going up and down. They also got a taste for delivery services, for ordering things on their phone and then having it just magically show up, whether it was a meal or something they order online. And while that's hugely disruptive, it also, for our stores and restaurants and things, and we have to think about the gig economy workers and others who are affected by that change, it's also pretty important for our transportation future, because they just won't always need to make a trip for something for everything or every activity every day, all the time. So they got a taste for driving less. Some people got their first taste for working from home. I don't think a lot of those things are going to go away. I think they're going to get incorporated when we can come back to the offices in larger numbers, or we get to go back to restaurants in larger numbers and things like that. I think we'll do so. We'll be so grateful for that because we're social beings. We want to be together. And at the same time, we won't all necessarily be packing into our cars and jamming the same intersections at the peak hour, like Carlos described. There's one thing I have noticed though. When the traffic went down, the speeders started driving a lot faster. So in the very same moment when there's a lot more people in the street, the fewer cars have given a kind of invitation to flooring it for the people who are driving. And it confirmed a suspicion, I know mobility is our topic here, it confirmed a mobility suspicion I've had for a long time, which is that traffic congestion is actually a safety measure. It's a safety tool. You have a little traffic congestion and you make it possible for people to move down the street without terracing around the corner. That could be really good for somebody who's standing on that street corner or about to use that sidewalk. A last thought here, Cheryl, is just, city planning in the modern professional sense has its roots in public health and in parks planning. And we are really seeing this year a kind of reminder of why that's so incredibly important. I volunteer as the vice president for the Parks Foundation at Miami-Dade, and it's given me kind of a window on how important these green and open to the sky places are when people need to get out of their houses where they've been cooped up. And they need to go where they can have a lot of elbow room around them and get fresh air and sunshine without being right on top of somebody else. And man, have you ever seen a better case for how important our park system is? This is huge. And I hope that it makes everybody, not just the parks advocates, more aware of that.
Yeah, our last program was about parks and public spaces, and we had Maria Nardi on, and we talked about that. And I happen to live on the Venetian Causeway on the eastern end of it in Miami Beach, and I have to drive like 10 miles an hour now when I'm coming and going because there are so many more people out biking and walking, and of course not staying within the proper lane. And I'm starting to advocate to make sure that we get a protected bike lane there. But I think that you're right that people are now they forgot about, oh yeah, I can walk here, and I know it's hot, but I can walk more. I can ride my bike more. And I think part of that was because maybe the gyms closed, and so people still wanted to get out and get the exercise. So I think while we may go back to a certain way, I think a lot of this is going to stay with us. At least I hope that it does. So one of the things I always talk about is learning from others and not reinventing the wheel. And so that was one of the questions that I have is, what, in terms of what you're doing in your research, and especially I know, Victor, with you, that you do so much work outside of our area, what important things that are you learning that you can bring back to Miami and try to see what we can do to make things happen here?
On the subject of good mobility?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
I mean, we could talk about it.
Because there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things we can learn from our peer cities. I think of a few things. First, other major metropolitan areas have really learned to leverage the power of pilot projects doing things in a demonstration level, not in whether it's a tactical urbanist installation or something that is introduced as a demonstration pending a much more expensive and more permanent bricks and mortar kind of concrete construction later on. And that's a really powerful thing. We saw that transform the way they made decisions in New York. The old model was figure out the ultimate final solution at its fullest expense and with all the stormwater figured out and the curbs and everything, and then work through a myriad number of committees and departments and bureaucracies to get to an answer, so to get to yes, often getting stalled along the process, and only doing the biggest, most expensive projects that had the consultant teams and staff devotion and whatever to push those through. When they switched to doing pilot projects and quick demonstrations, they basically just sent a crew out in the middle of the night and painted epoxy on the street or added boulders and flowering plants and big pots and movable tables and chairs, and they got a lot of people a chance to see how it would be and say, oh, well, this is okay. And then there was very rapid transformation from the temporary version to the permanent. So pilot projects is one thing I think we don't see nearly as many of here. Maybe Carlos knows of a few that are in the works or are coming, but Quick Build tried to do that here with support grant funding from the Transit Center, and it became somehow really hard to do anything quick. So the Quick Build projects were not implemented quickly. So we almost got a taste of what that might be like here. I've seen that in traveling in a lot of other places. The next thing I would say is that our peer cities put first emphasis, highest priority emphasis on safe walking as the primary mode of travel. You have to, that's the baseline of a livable city. It has to be walkable, which, by the way, also means that you need to make it accessible and safe for people with disabilities and those in wheelchairs or sight impaired. It also means you need to make it safe for people on 2 wheels instead of on 2 feet. But walking is the primary mode, after which you get that solved, and then you solve for freight and garbage and fire trucks and car traffic. And instead of doing it the other way around here, it's, well, you can do traffic calming as long as you don't actually calm any actual traffic too much. And we need to break past that. And I think that'll only happen if we do holistic thinking, thinking about street-oriented architecture and urban design, land use, and transportation stuff, and the engineering of the street holistically instead of in these separate silos. How's that?
Yeah, that's terrific. And that leads me to Marta. Oh, Carlos, you unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to?
No, I figured
Sorry,
I was going to be
Marta.
naturally the next, but Marta can go. But they're good. So Victor, it's definitely on point, right? Definitely, there's a lot that we can learn from other cities. And first, I think at least from my point of view, I have been lucky enough, like I said, to be closer to some other cities now because everyone is so open on this digital world that basically it's a lot easier for us to engage with other cities, even not traveling, but still communicating with them. So we have a networks of 500 city officials throughout the entire nation that we communicate through Slack channels or through emails or through other things, right? There's a lot to be learned, right? I think you were on point in terms of the pilot project. The old way of addressing projects was, I need to find the ultimate solution. It needs to be designed to the very detail. Then I need to find funding for it, right? And then it can go into construction after a long term of procurement, right? So it was basically a long, and by the end, teams might change, right? Some of these projects get initiated with a need, and then 10 years later you have a project, right? That is not necessarily the way we need to move forward. And we learn, we've seen that from other cities, right? So that tells you a few things, right? First is design should be fed with actual implementation, right? So if we talk about pilot project, let's talk about that's just the conceptual component that we're going to be implementing in order to feed the ultimate design, right? So change that and start putting some structure or some solutions on the ground. At the same time, it is critical for us to detach ourselves, to specifically look only at manuals and standardization of solutions, and use our knowledge, our education, and our engineering degrees to start identifying what ways we can go around that in order to provide better solutions. And the last thing I want to mention too is funding. right? It is hard sometimes when we start thinking about projects, and if you don't have an dedicated funding or funding that can allow for that. Here in Miami-Dade County, we have, fortunate enough, we have, a lot of developments coming in and introducing a lot of funds, but that goes into something that's called the traffic impact fee, right? So basically, it is something that can only be used for relieving congestion on vehicular traffic. And that's why, now we're moving into a mobility impact fee in a way that we can still use new developments coming in and new funding sources that we can start applying into all different sources of projects, right? So there's different components that we need to address, and at least I'm optimistic the fact that now I can get closer to other cities, and I have like a direct line to many other cities and say, hey, how you did this? How can we apply that same thing here in Miami-Dade?
So thanks, Carla. So Marta, let me take this, what both of them have talked about, and ask you, how can we, as citizens and those that are on the call, what can we do to help make some of these best practices happen here? And how can we have a voice? And where do we go? We have 34 municipalities.
Right.
Yeah. It's like really difficult to make something happen globally. And what's your advice there?
Well, first of all, I think anybody that knows me knows that I think very highly of our individual need to be engaged. And by the way, I have a new puppy, and she is just all over the place. So she might pop in and say hi. But so I think us being engaged civically, right? That goes everything from voting to showing up at commission meetings, being able to talk. I would have to say there's a lot of great organizations, Transit Alliance being one of them, but Engage Miami, a lot of organizations that break down the issues so that you know what's coming up and you can involve yourself. I think that I will always remain the eternal optimist that being engaged in that way is the thing that leads to change. But I will say that there are some other things that I kind of in the spirit of what other cities have learned, and a lot to do with what Victor and Carlos talked about, this idea of taking quick action, but also not just putting it on government's end, but also we need to do a really great job of engaging our business community. One thing that our business community can do a great job at is learning to let go of this. A lot of times we have businesses that are really, really attached to this one parking space in front of their location. And it is, I get it. It's, when those parking spaces are full, there's this, somebody can access my doorway to my business very easily. But what they're missing out on is that usually that parking space comes at a cost of hundreds and possibly thousands of pedestrians and individuals on bicycles and other people getting around in different ways that they're not accessing that business. And I think because our local economy, because our local sort of just the way that we work in South Florida is so business minded, I think making the business case for a much more mixed mobility picture that really does prioritize pedestrians, as Victor mentioned in his comments, I think would actually open the door for not only a better mobility outcome, but for more prosperity, a healthier economic picture for all of us. And I think we're beginning to see it now, right? People are very eager, bigger business owners are very eager to get out into the street and beyond their walls. And a parking space in front of a business in certain areas is actually not so much important anymore. Being able to put tables and chairs out there is now more important. But if we could turn the dial up on that and engage our business community and let them know, if you're a customer, let them know, hey, the lack of a bike rack anywhere on this block is an impediment to me coming here, or the inability for me to walk here safely is an impediment for me coming. I think that somehow needs to come out a lot more visibly. And I think also on government's end, some of the recent changes that have happened with reallocating space for pedestrians and for human beings versus cars to help businesses succeed a bit more, sort of make it through this crisis, has also put a lot of burden on the business owner. So they have to rent those big, heavy, expensive jersey barricades to create like a parklet, or they have to in some way like either pay for police or security to close down the street, or whatever the case might be, or incur a lot of expense on insurance. So I think sharing that cost a little bit, or creating ways that that cost can be mitigated a bit, would be very helpful. And those things all go hand in hand, so that the activity that we want to see on the street can be there, because people are able to access the services and the recreation and all of the things that they want to access by means other than a car.
That's very true. As you know, we're downtown, and as you are, and some of the restaurants now are having parklets, moving chairs and tables out on the street, but they're required to have these huge jersey barricades around them, and it's a production, and I think not everybody's willing to do that. The more difficult that you make it, at least it's happening, better than not, but we need to look at all of those kinds of things for sure. So next I want to, I think what I'm going to do is I have a couple of like final questions, but we have a few good questions from our listeners, watchers, Zoomers, and let me go to that. What strategies have you used when dealing with old school transportation and public officials? We won't make you answer this, Carlos. Who see the personal car as the king and are against any planning design strategies that might benefit alternative transportation methods with the cost reduced of travel and even just slowing car traffic flow. Victor, you want to answer that?
There are a couple of things that have developed as habits for us over time as we've confronted that again and again. It's a good question, Stuart. And there's no magic bullet, because there is no better way to ensnare and end or lodge and trap and slow a really good project than to have one entrenched bureaucrat who says, I'm not doing that, or we're not doing that on my watch. So when that happens, it can really be an ultimate obstacle. That said, if you run into one of those old school officials that is thinking the car is king, one of the best things you can do is get them outside the vehicle, however briefly, like you get them to actually go into the space. So we always try to make a field trip. So let's just go. Well, they're going to park down the block, and then we'll walk down the block. And even better if you can get them to take a bike ride. And I'll give credit where it's due. A lot of our regional transportation officials have been doing this more regularly. I've participated in a number of rides where our TPO director, our MDTVW director, and the DOT District 6 secretary all went on the bike ride to see what the experience was like, or what those tricky street crossings were like for people on the underline. And those kind of experiences are really good. Not that any of them are old school; they're very much progressive on all these issues. But if we can get them out there to take a little bike ride, or to walk the place, get out of that SUV or the big truck just for a little while and stand in the space like a vulnerable road user would, they usually realize that there's a whole other set of things to consider. So that's one thing. That doesn't always work. So the next strategy is to know their literature better than they know it. And so, for example, again, giving credit, the DOT has redone all their manuals. Like in the last 2 years, they redid their main design manual that controls how people do the preliminary design engineering of projects. Not all of the line personnel down in the individual districts and middle management or what have you, or even our friends at MTVW know that is the case. So we open the book and we say, right here, it says that the modal emphasis priority in this context zone is pedestrians first. By the way, that's Bird Road between the Palmetto Expressway and Red Road. If you've seen it, there's not much there on the ground right now that would tell you that the manual's been rewritten to say when that kind of facility is redesigned to reimagine, pedestrians are supposed to be number one on their chart of priorities for mode emphasis. So if you know their literature, you can actually show it to them and say, hey, you know, you have permission. It says right here, if you lower the design speed, you can use an 11-foot lane instead of a 12-foot lane. And if we do that enough times, we're going to have room for street trees and sidewalks and bike infrastructure and all that. So one of the biggest things that's hard for people to understand is how much difference design speed makes. Like the speed of traffic is what makes the collisions so dangerous. And you know, getting the speed down as an engineering criterion doesn't necessarily mean you're going to create a street with less capacity. So if you can show them that diagram that's in their own book, that's one thing that tends to help.
That's sneaky, but very good. I like that. Hey, did you know this? Does anybody else have? I think that was a good response. I don't know if you, Marta, if you want to.
Yeah, just a really, absolutely to everything that Victor said, and in the order he said it, absolutely. The one thing I would add as an appendage is also getting other people that feel opposite, that feel that the car is not king, elevating those voices, because a lot of times the people making decisions are relying on sometimes what seems to be a fairly small group of individuals that they're being influenced by, and making sure that other individuals, business owners, you know, different people within the community that feel differently can express themselves and sort of show that there's a difference of opinion out there, that there's support for something different.
That's very true, because very often when you go to a commission meeting, it's the squeaky wheel. You know, the people that show up, that talk, are the ones that get the attention. And if you don't go, and you don't get people to go that are like-minded, they never hear that, and it's not an issue. So I have another good question. I'm skipping over you on purpose, Carlos. I don't want to put you on the spot, unless you want to comment. But the next one that I see is Mr. Dover mentioned that the best cities are walkable cities. I live in the suburbs, a very non-walkable part of most cities. How do we change suburban communities to make them more walkable?
A huge subject. We should actually do one of these webinars on just that. But
okay.
But you know, there's some places to start. First, that suburb is probably made up of a number of different components that are kind of separated from one another, like subdivisions with houses in them, or apartment complexes with multifamily residences in them, or shopping centers with retail and office parks and workplaces. But yeah, you need to move between these different things from one day to the next or 1 hour to the next, and that's where the challenge comes in. So a couple thoughts. First, the least beloved and most forgettable and most temporary, fragile, and economically obsolete of all of those is the strip shopping center, and to some extent the shopping malls. You know, if somebody's selling a house in the suburbs, they try to route their prospect some other way besides going down the strip, whether it's on Kendall Drive or University Drive or US 1 or one of those streets. They try to give them some other routes. They don't see all that ugliness and that cellscape, because nobody loves the strip or the strip shopping centers. And so, you know, those are ripe for change. First of all, they're graying out because we lost a lot of tenants just in the last 6 months. We were losing them before. You remember Sears? Remember Kmart? Remember Circuit City? Remember Linens and Things? Remember Lord and Taylor? Remember, I'm just going down the list. Neiman Marcus is closing 150 stores. Those things are definitely now ripe for change. And that parcel is a place that probably nobody loves it, doesn't like the way it looks now. That's a perfect place to promote the idea of loosening up the zoning and getting serious about design. So you have some real streets in there. You can get mixed use. You could have some places to live and work that are right with the places to get a good meal or a cup of coffee. I maybe catch a transit ride. So I think that's a good thing to do in the suburbs. What I just described, though, takes years. What about something quicker and simpler? I'll tell you, plant trees. Plant street trees. And all trees matter, but street trees in particular. That's just going to increase your chances of being able to move from here to your yoga class or from here to your friend's house on your bike instead of doing it by driving everywhere. So that doesn't require you to connect everybody's cul-de-sacs to everybody else's or to tear anything down. Just plant trees. I mean, if we start with that, all it will do is be a gateway drug for a more livable community in all other respects.
Yeah, let's, I have a couple more questions. And one is from Tom Mooney. Hi, Tom. Does the panel believe that the market is a better, Cheryl, is a better judge of what parking should be provided in a site rather than a code based on dated suburban models? Who wants to respond? Carlos, you want to respond to that?
You want a one-syllable answer?
Or Victor? Okay, yeah.
Go for it,
Yes.
Victor.
Yes. Yes. Eliminate
Yes.
minimum parking requirements. It's the dumbest thing that ever came into land development regulation. Now, the market can get this wrong. Like, by the market, do you mean customers and homeowners or residents in an apartment building? Or by the market, do you mean big corporations who are making macro decisions from far away? Like IBM might say, well, if we're going to have 500 workers, we want 600 parking spaces. And the actual users of those spaces is not involved in that discussion, but they're just using their big corporate leverage over a developer or a redevelopment agency or whatever to get extra elbow room in the parking. All they're going to do is induce more driving. But that's not the market. That's somebody in between the provider of that space or that building or that land and the actual users of it.
So yeah, who's the market? I have another one. I'm a cyclist. Why does the county, this is for you, Carlos, why does the county think the Cheryl Lane concept is a viable solution for cycling mobility? And, he says that the person, that he finds the concept to be completely unsafe and dangerous. Can't we get dedicated protected lanes? And what can I do or what can he do to help make that happen?
I chuckle a bit because I live in a small pocket of OMSA. And early today I was walking around and I saw a crew putting a Cheryl on my street, which again is a very narrow street, putting a Cheryl on it. So it was interesting for me to see that. So a couple of things. I think, Cheryl was something that was brought into, early 2010s, I guess, that idea that we can, I don't know how far along, Victor, but it was something that it was put out there. And I think today it should not be looked at as a bicycle facility, but more as a reinforcement of information to let people know that bicycles are completely allowed and permissible to be in the middle of the lane on a travel, right, on a street. So to me, it is not perfectly a facility. So that's, to me, we can continue to do Cheryls in areas like the one I live, that is perfectly acceptable because it's 25 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour is very slow speed. In terms of protected bike lane, I completely agree with you. And I think we need to also understand the difference between buffer separated and protected bike lanes. There's a big gamma of these conditions. And I think, even the Federal Highway Administration has a good book on the separated bike lanes guidelines, which tells you a little bit of all these things in there. Right now, the biggest issue that we have is right-of-way and funding. Right, like I mentioned before, I think in order for us to put a separated bike lane like we mean it. I love that when Victor says, let's do things like we mean it. In order to do that, we need to put the bicycle facility with a proper buffer with some device in the middle to make sure that doesn't include or augment potential collisions. So by doing that, you need a lot of right-of-way and sometimes a right-of-way acquisition or eliminating a lane. I'm a big fan of repurposing travel lanes, but then that also goes against the current funding mechanism that we have today. So it's a very dynamic component. I think you or anyone that is a bicycle advocate, you need to continue to promote and say, this this is my street too. I want to be here. I want to be riding my bicycle. You're fully allowed to be on the streets. If you don't feel safe, that is completely appropriate for us to say this is not safe for a bicycle rider to be here, and let's figure out better ways to do that and start figuring out a way to reallocate. We just recently completed, again, within the last year, a protected bike lane down by the government center, South Day Government Center, and we've done a couple others around. But I think we need more of the support, more of like Marta says, the people that need it, they need to tell that this is going to benefit their lives, right? I saw even a police officer from Miami Beach talking about Alton Road, right? And someone that is on the bike on every day doing their job and not feeling comfortable, right? So there is a lot to do, and I think more voices, the fact that two wheels is an appropriate way to move in Miami-Dade County, against to the perception that because we're too hot and because it's too humid, because it rains a lot, people don't bike. That happens in other cities and they still bike. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, let's figure out where we can fit it in. Let's not wait until the perfect, right? Let's not wait until we have a massive right of way or we take lanes away. Let's figure out where places we can start repurposing, either a slip kind of a parking area or a travel lane that is underutilized. A turning lane is a lot easier to remove than a full travel lane. So there's things we can do in order to be incremental, and then start looking for additional funding. We need to start asking for funding from a federal, from state, and from local government to make sure we can introduce these solutions in.
And find out what your community's bike plan is and
Cheryl, can I jump
advocate
in real
for it.
quick?
Yeah, Marta, go ahead.
This is going to be a pointed comment, so Carlos, you can close your ears if you want, so that you're not implicated in any way. But just to drive. Yeah, just to drive this point a little bit home further, and probably to answer Stanley Evans, I saw your question about how you can get involved as well as Jason. Recently, what in my opinion was kind of a tragedy that has occurred is that the county, actually Carlos has been very involved in this project, put a lot of work behind what was going to be the beginnings of a protected bike network in the downtown area. That downtown night bike network was specifically, portion of the money that was raised specifically came from money that was set aside from the scooter pilot that kind of, was citywide. Or rather, no, it was not citywide. It was only in the downtown district because other commissioners did not want it in their district. So they said, fine, we're not going to have it in the district. All of the proceeds from the scooter pilot is going to go into a fund to enhance this type of mobility in the downtown area, right? And so out of that downtown protected bike lane emerged. When that project came to the city commission just recently, I want to say it was 3 weeks ago or something along those lines, that item was indefinitely deferred, and likely the conversations happening on the back end is that money will not be used for the protected bike lane because they felt, well, we're in this time of crisis and we need to allocate these monies somewhere else. But really, what other place, not only was that money specifically collected to create this protected bike network, but where else could we invest money but in infrastructure that leads to better health outcomes, that leads to our city being more resilient, less car dependent, gives us more space to get outside and get active, but not necessarily being on top of one another. What better use of that money in this time than that? But those decisions are happening because, in my opinion, our commissioner, the commissioners, the city commissioners that are making those choices feel like, well, there's not enough people advocating for these bikes, or there's enough people advocating against it, or think there's something else that's more important to happen. So Stanley, your voice is needed. Jason, your voice is needed. And if you need a place to plug in that voice, visit Transit Alliance Miami. I mean, there's other organizations that are also advocating for this, but this is the one that I know the best. They can help direct how you might get engaged in this situation. But I think that it's a tragic project, because this project, if it doesn't move forward now, the county loses the opportunity to move forward with it in the future. just because of the way that funding has been allocated. So I think that that's one issue. Like, you know, people are out there trying to do the right thing, and then it just gets pushed back or pushed off, or there's every excuse not to do it.
That's just the latest episode in an ongoing series, like the sort of departure from the original idea for a large segment of the Snapper Creek Greenway because of not in my backyard pushback, or the decisions in South Miami and Coral Gables that I know well for projects that were part of those bike master plans you mentioned, Cheryl, but when they went to implement it, they got a real pushback, mainly from drivists who have this fear that somehow welcoming more people on 2 feet or 2 wheels into the public realm will impede their ability to, I'm not sure, drive as fast
really
as they want. But they pull some important, they push some important buttons. They will say, this is going to cause all the trees to get cut down. Well, that's not the case, was never the case. But once you say it, it's like you stood on the beach and yelled shark and watched all the people get out of the water just for fun. So I think we have, the challenge we really have, this is connected to Stuart's original question, isn't just with the entrenched bureaucrat or the old school engineer. It's with building public support for these things. So we elect people who get it with regard to walking, biking, and transit, and they show the power of political leadership because they know their constituents want these things. So to Stanley, you asked, how can I help? Just as a current architecture school student, ride your bike to the university. I know it can be done. That white bike right there has been back and forth to FIU and UM a bunch of times. So I think the more of us that are out there, the more accustomed the rest of the population becomes to the idea. The more they experience themselves in easy and non-threatening ways, the more they'll say, hey, this is pretty cool. I think we should do some more of this. So I think we need to build public support, as they have done in our peer cities, not just in this country, but around the world. We've kind of left that. It's almost like we're waiting for the DOT to tell us it's okay to walk and bike and use transit, or waiting for DTPW to do it. They're not opposed to the idea, but they know they don't like to get a call in the middle of the night from an elected official who got a call from a person who's angry about something. So they get scared. They get scared to turn an extra travel lane into a bus-only lane so that the buses can be a faster way to move around the county than the car would be. So if we are timid as a population, then our elected officials will be timid, and guess what? The bureaucrats who work with them will also be timid. So it comes down to us to actually demand it and to explain it to other people and show them what that can be like.
I think that we all are saying get involved. So we're a minute over, but this is a really interesting conversation. We're not losing people, so I'm going to take make an executive decision and stay on a little bit longer because I want to ask each of you my final question, and that is, I'm going to start with you, Carlos. What is the one final thought that you want to share with our listeners and help them in understanding this great world of mobility?
Yes. So one thing I can tell you is mobility is for everyone, right? Whether in any mode that you are, that is for you. Mobility is there. And one thing that we need to talk about is that we need to change the way we do transportation planning and planning for new mobility solutions that we have in place. Like Victor mentioned, this is the old way of getting things done. And now we're talking about engagement of the community. So that tells me, and that it validates something that I've been trying to push for a little while now, and fortunately I have a Knight Foundation grant to start doing this. And it is to start getting the community engaged in more of the transportation planning for all the new solutions there. To not only go and do community meetings, but actually engage with members of the community to be participants and take ownership of disseminating the information and doing the home focus groups and start feeding back in a more kind of two-way conversation. We need to increase this kind of network of getting engaged and start informing decision making. So I think that to me is, we cannot lose our faith in here. There's a lot that to be done, and it's changed. It's not easy. We're changing historically how we always done it, and how we always done it is not the right answer. right? And not for anything. This is the moment of change. And to me, it is a point that we need to push further and harder to make sure that we hear everyone's voice. Because, planning for a community without the community being engaged is a no-go. And that is you, and that's everyone else is around you. And we need that voice to be embedded into transportation planning.
Thanks, Carlos. Victor, final words?
Well, I think everybody should be encouraged and realize it doesn't matter which of the professions or daily activities related to the built environment you're involved in, there's something that you can do. For example, the architects can get good at doing street-oriented architecture. So there you go, AI in Miami, that's something to do. Street-oriented architecture, doors and windows facing the street, not balconies, and with balconies and storefronts and that sort of stuff, not blank walls and parking garages next to our sidewalks. You can help, even with just one building you're designing. So it doesn't matter who you are or what part of the spectrum of built environment work you do. You have some way to contribute. And then I would say, it sounds a little trite, and I'm sorry, but that old phrase from Gandhi about be the change you want to see in the world, that's exactly applicable in this particular case. I don't think the car optional community is that hard or that elusive or that far away. We can do it, and we just have to decide, that in our way of doing our daily lives or in our thing that we're working on that day, we're going to be part of the solution.
Thanks, Victor. Marta?
I think that I'd like to take it back where we started a little bit, and some of Victor and Carlos's initial comments. I don't think that anybody, any of us, anybody on this call or anybody in the greater community needs to settle for, oh, well, change is hard and it takes time. We live in 2020. We have a ton of resources and technology at our disposal. We do not need to wait a decade for improved bike lanes and better transportation. Be restless, be impatient, be more demanding, don't be timid, because if it's a pilot project or it's a permanent project, it can happen quickly. All the rest is excuses. And so, just keep pushing. Don't accept those excuses of like, well, it just takes so much. No, it doesn't have to take so much. Just keep pushing for things to happen quickly.
Thanks. You're absolutely right. So I just wanted to let everybody know that all of our urban redesign series conversations are on our website. This one will be on by Monday on the MCAD website. That's miamicad.org. And also, I wanted to let you know that we're doing an Instagram live in Espanol of our exhibition here, a walkthrough of our exhibition, and that's on September 8th. So if you're not already, please follow us on Instagram, Miami_CAD. I want to thank all three of you. It's a fascinating discussion. I think we could probably be here another hour, and but it's lunch is over, and it's time for us to all get back to whatever we were doing before. I want to thank all of you for logging on and for continuing to participate in our series. And our next and final one for a while is next week with Urban 3 and Domenicosi. So please tune in for that. And again, thank you guys. Great discussion.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. It was a
And thank you
pleasure.
for everybody that signed on.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.